What does the Joy of Creation hype from the player out of bounds and behind the scenes? When it comes to Five Nights at Freddy's fan games, the Joy of Creation is often hailed as one of the best there is. Given the remake, I wanted to turn back to the Joy of Creation story mode to show you things you aren't normally supposed to see. From how the jump scares work, to out of bounds areas, to an alternative look at some funny cutscenes. And, as a bonus, we'll be breaking down the Joy of Creation Reborn as well. So I hope you enjoy this deep dive into this iconic horror game. In the Joy of Creation story mode, you're made to survive within the haunted halls of the Cawthon's family home. Now, as usual, I like to quickly recap what we'll be covering. That way we're all caught up on the flow of events. So as we head into the bedroom, we'll be playing from the perspective of Scott's son Nick. In classic FNAF fashion, we must make it at 6 a.m. Only here, we're managing our sanity instead of power. As the night goes on, Freddy will tap the window with his broken arm before eventually looking inside. You must quickly close the curtains to avoid being seen. Otherwise, he'll enter the room and jump scare you. Much like Freddy, Foxy's arrival is forewarned by his hooked hand appearing behind the player. And the only way to avoid his jump scare is to sit back in the crib and pretend to sleep. Bonnie, who enters the door in front of us, will knock 3 times before coming inside. You must turn the light off and sit in the crib to avoid their attack, making it a lot harder to fend off the other animatronics. Chica appears in the closet to our right, and unlike the other animatronics, Chica is typically non-fatal, the only exception being when our sanity is extremely low. At 5 a.m., our sanity is forced into the red, making things a lot more chaotic as we near the end of the night. Recap aside, let's begin by taking a look at the map around us. First, the area just outside the window is a lot less fleshed out than you may think. There are a couple of trees outside the window that are just floating here, and the rain effect seen through the window occupies very little space. There really isn't a reason to add more than this, considering the player can only view this area from a set position inside the crib. Now, directly next to these other objects, we can find Freddy's arm resting against the side of the house just beyond the player's view. The arm itself isn't directly attached to Freddy, but he is still present just beneath the house itself. He's rotated at a bit of an angle, and he just chills here for a majority of the night. From a different angle, we can watch as his severed arm moves up into the window, and after a short time has passed, his arm will then reattach itself as Freddy himself pops up into sight. Well, half of him anyway? For some reason, Freddy's torso completely detaches from his legs when he appears in the window. This is a bit odd to me, especially considering the fact that he reassembles completely when entering the bedroom. This level is slightly less scary now, knowing Freddy's legs are just chilling in the void out of sight. Now, if the player fails to shut the curtains in time, Freddy warps from outside the window and appears directly behind the bed. At this point, a jump scare is pretty much inevitable, but from this angle, it's a bit funnier than you'd expect. As this animation begins, he lunges forward and grabs us, flying up in the ceiling as he does. Blood then splatters above the roof, and we're sent to the game over screen. This animation is hilariously buggy when viewed from this angle, and I had no idea that this was taking place during my original playthrough. While we're on the topic of Freddy clipping through stuff, I should mention that he technically can be seen inside the bedroom before he ever attacks. Due to the angle that he's placed in, the very top of his hat can be seen poking through the floor next to the crib. This isn't typically visible to the player, as it's barely outside our field of view. Overall, it's pretty funny just how buggy Freddy is in the level, and you'd never know it during a typical playthrough. If we take a look behind the closet and just outside the map, we'll find multiple animatronics lined up out here. These are the jump scare models for Bonnie, Chica, Freddy, and even Shadow Freddy. What's interesting is that each of these models is currently frozen in place, but if we look behind the crib, we'll find an endless loop of Foxy's jump scare playing out in the void. When Foxy appears behind the bed, you'll see that a separate model is loaded in and his arm extends through the floor. The top of his head is also popping out of the floor, and we can see the rest of his body sticking out through the bottom of the level. From this perspective, it looks like he's hanging on for dear life, and if his hook slips, he'll fall into the void below. The following stage of his animation shows him warping up into a standing pose, clipping through the crib in what looks like a relaxed T-pose. When he's in this stage, we can no longer access the curtains, so we're completely open to being attacked by Freddy if he doesn't get us first. In this shot, you can see both the standard and jump scare model activate at the same time. As I said earlier, if Foxy doesn't kill us first, then Freddy definitely will. And because I never closed the curtains, he took Foxy's place inside the bedroom. He then jump scared me, forcing me to start the night over again. When Foxy gets you though, his jump scare model will be moved into the map, and the previous version will be warped beneath the floor. In bullet time, we can see that he grabs the player and swings his hook at you, killing you instantly. We may have died horrifically, but at least Freddy has some company in the vast nothingness of space. So when Bonnie appears at the door in front of you, he'll knock 3 times before opening it. However, he can also trick the player by knocking twice and never opening it. It turns out that even though it's never opened, Bonnie still appears behind the door when he fakes us out. He has no animations for this knocking sequence, and the door simply opens in front of him. If we're not sitting down with the light off, he'll instantly teleport beside the crib until we look at him. In slow motion, his jump scare is absolutely brutal. We're hit with the famous Bonnie punch as a massive blood splatter stretches across the room. As for Chica, she attacks us through the closet with a typically non-lethal jump scare. We can see from this angle that Chica instantly appears inside the closet as it starts to open. She kind of just stares at us in a "Mom said it's my turn" on the Xbox pose, and if the lights aren't turned off or the player tries to sleep, the door shuts and the jump scare model is instantly moved next to the crib. Afterwards, this version of Chica quickly slides out of the map back to its inactive location. The model, hidden in the closet, never left though, so as far as I know, there will be 2 Chicas loaded in for the rest of the night. So as the night goes on, your sanity level slowly goes down, which is indicated by the colored light on the wall. The lamp behind you is used to slow the loss of sanity, though it can't be regained once it's lost. As it drops, things begin to change around you, which makes it harder to complete the night. Your vision starts to fill with static, your screen begins to shake, and you'll even hallucinate Golden and Shadow Freddy. When he appears, we can see from another angle that Golden Freddy is just floating upside down in our face. It's terrifying when it happens during gameplay, but from this perspective, it's glorious. It looks like he's standing on the ceiling, which makes it a bit hard to take him seriously. While viewing this, Shadow Freddy just clipped through the wall and floated at me before warping beneath the level, which was pretty weird. Now if the player completely runs out of sanity, they'll appear in a bed in the middle of a forest. After looking around briefly, you'll catch a glimpse of Golden Freddy before being sent to the game over screen. The forest, seen in this short sequence, is actually right next to the bedroom itself. There are a bunch of trees out here, and they surround a bed placed in the center. The trees themselves are actually placed a lot lower than the bed itself, and Golden Freddy is seen clipping through the headboard. This loads in with the rest of the map as soon as the night begins, and we're only warped over here when our sanity fully depletes. That's it for the bedroom though, so let's head into the living room. So the second memory in Joy of Creation is the living room. And in this scenario, we play as Scott Cawthon's wife, Val. So normally you have to use a TV in front of you by sitting on the couch, and through this TV you can watch both Freddy and Foxy move in an adjacent hallway. And this functionality allows you to pause them, which prevents one of the 2 from moving while the other is still moving towards you. Of course, as the night progresses, both Freddy and Foxy are not the only adversaries you will face. Bonnie is lurking in the hallway directly behind you, and you must look through a keyhole to determine if you're about to get jumped by Bonnie. Bonnie sort of yells to alert you that this is going to happen, but you must use all the different doors by staying out of sight when someone opens the door. So whether it's Freddy, Foxy, or Bonnie, you must always be out of sight when those characters open the door, otherwise you will die. Now, Chica also appears in this run, like an angry parent who wants you to turn off the television. And if you don't comply, you're either going to get stunned or just die. You know, it's a good idea to take a break once in a while. But that basically covers the core mechanics. You need to survive the night, but what the player does not see is everything happening around this room. And that's precisely what makes this kind of exciting to see. So this map is kind of laid out pretty interestingly. The room that you're in has 4 doors. Now, 3 of these doors are ones you'll see open throughout gameplay, but one of these actually never opens. Behind the door that has a Freddy poster on it is actually nothing. It's like a small closet, and the inside isn't even textured. It's just like this default white and gray grid that's applied to the room. But yeah, it's a very small closet, and obviously the player is not supposed to see in here. But the hallways that Freddy and Foxy come out of also really have nothing. They are just a straight hallway that goes back a little bit and then they end. But Bonnie's hallway is a bit different. Now all these hallways have invisible blocks right beyond the door, so the player can never actually wander inside. But if we were to take the camera and kind of go down Bonnie's hallway, we can see Bonnie just clipping through the floor. I'm not entirely sure why they were put this way, because they do move down this hallway eventually, but for some reason their default position is clipping through the ground. And now you can see the room and all the hallways that branch off it from above. And as you can see, this is how it's laid out. Now, around this room are other things that are out of bounds too. For starters, there's just a Freddy who's chilling out in space. Not sure why he's there. My hunch is this is the jump scare Freddy that appears when you get jump scared. Basically, this Freddy model warps into the middle of the room when the jump scare animation plays. And it's kind of funny because if you have the game fully lit up and all the effects off, you can see that when you get jump scared by Freddy, the old Freddy that opened the door is still behind him, yet there is a new Freddy that appears in the center of the room that kills you. So at that moment, there are actually two Freddys in the room, which is twice as terrifying. If we restore the game to its natural lighting, we can also see that by this Freddy out of bounds, there's like these two red floating lights and there is a white light. And my hunch for this is that these lights are very similar to the jump scares. When the animatronics poke out the door, both Foxy and Bonnie have a red light, while Freddy has a white light. And my hunch is that these three objects, again, to save memory, are called upon and are warped inside their mouths when they come through the doors. Now that's just a hunch, I can't really prove that, but when I see these lights out here, that's immediately what I think of. Now there's also a strange combination of Freddy and Foxy out of bounds too. And it's not really a whole model. It is just Freddy's face and Foxy's arm with the hook. And as you can see, Foxy's arm is fully extended upwards, like he's raising his hook into the air. So between Bonnie's hallway and Foxy's hallway, we can find Chica floating out in the void. Now, Chica is just kind of sitting there, slowly biding her time until she can break into the room and yell at us to get off the TV. And this essentially covers the core basics for this room. However, there is something really interesting that I want to talk about in this map that we haven't gone over yet. And these are the hallways that you can see through the cameras. So normally when you go to that TV, you can see both Foxy and Freddy walking through different hallways, ultimately coming to those doors that lead to your room. Now in the game, that's actually not true. They are not actually walking to those hallways you can see. It's just when they reach these doors in these other hallways, a Freddy or a Foxy spawns in to open the door. And they would also unload after the door closes. However, way out of bounds are these two hallways that we can see through the cameras. And these hallways are completely empty, except for the floating noses of both Foxy and Freddy. So as you can see, we have Freddy's nose and there's some wires. Foxy is the same way. The reason they look this way is because the player can never see their body anyways. When we're looking through that camera, we can only see their nose. So the developer, of course, made them just a nose. Now what's interesting is that these hallways do have objects in them. However, the default player camera that we walk around with actually cannot see the objects. Only the cameras tied to the animatronics, viewed through the TV, can see the objects in these hallways. And this is where we are going to do another experiment. We're actually going to take the player over here and have them walk around. So when we're in these hallways, we can walk around just fine. Now, the objects are still there and they do have collision, and we can't actually walk past them. Despite being invisible, they are still there. Now what's interesting is that when both Foxy and Freddy start to walk, the player can stop one of the two by standing in front of them. For example, Freddy cannot walk through me right now. Freddy is waiting for me to move and thus has frozen in place waiting for the player to get out of their way. So standing in front of the animatronic works basically in the same way as hitting the pause button on the TV. The animatronic is frozen in place and they can't do anything. However, the kill range on the other animatronics is unfortunately the entire map. So Foxy can kill us all the way over here even though we're stopping Freddy. As soon as we get jump scared, we get warped back into the room and we die. But now let's actually take the player and walk into these different areas. Going into the closet is, well, just as you would expect. It is a single closed room that you can't do anything in. Now, if we head into Bonnie's hallway, we can actually see the objects in the hallway, the different books and furniture placed in this area, and we can look at them. We can also walk to the end of this hallway and walk right through Bonnie. Bonnie can't hurt us at all, and we can see the entire map in front of us, looking out at the hallway that we were over at before, where both Freddy and Foxy walked through. Now, of course, even chilling back here with Bonnie, we are not safe. We will get jump scared by both Freddy or Foxy, and we'll die. However, let's see what happens if we ignore the first jump scare and then go back in this hallway. Because after Freddy and Foxy go through the first time, that's when Bonnie gets activated, and then Bonnie starts to move towards the room. And as you can see, Bonnie doesn't actually walk. Bonnie just appears. They jump from place to place, slowly making their way to the door. And even in this state, they cannot hurt us in this hallway. So the last thing we can do is we're going to go into Foxy's hallway, face the door, and wait for Foxy to spawn in. But we're also going to slow the game down. to show you how all of this works and to show you what happens the second the jump scare occurs. So as you can see, Foxy loads in, and as soon as they open the door and start looking around, we die. But it's actually kind of really funny because at this speed, you can actually see the player being dragged quickly to the center of the room. Normally, it feels instantaneous, but with this, we can see a couple frames in between as we go there. And of course, we get a really long, slow jump scare by Freddy. And that basically wraps up the living room. Onward to the next area. So now let's take a look at the office. So as we head into the office, we'll be stationed behind a desk with 3 monitors in front of us. Each screen contains a different camera for the surrounding areas, and we'll be using these frequently as the night presses on. In this level, you'll use the cameras and a flashlight to ward off the incoming waves of ignited animatronics. There are 2 doors and a window that you must keep tabs on, as these are where our enemies will approach from. Freddy can appear in practically all these locations, and we'll have to flash him with our light 11 times before the end of the night in order to win. Foxy can appear in the same locations as Freddy, though if we open the doors or windows while he's present, we'll be killed instantly. Instead, we'll stare at him through the cameras until he rage quits and leaves. Bonnie appears a bit later in the night, and he's basically only here to punch things. If we look at him through our camera, he'll Falcon punch it out, disabling it for the rest of the night. As for Chica, she's a bit more terrifying in this level. When Chica appears, she'll start crawling through a black spot on the wall, and 3 cupcakes must be located and scared off with a flashlight in order to stop her. Recap aside, the very first thing I wanted to do was have a look out of bounds. Immediately, I stumble across a small black box that contains something rather hilarious. Freddy can be found inside the box, only he's not in the greatest of shape. His torso is rotated horizontally, and his legs are sticking out of his stomach in an upright position. I'm not certain, but I believe this is actually the model used for Freddy's jump scare, and the player camera will be warped into this box when it's triggered. I have no idea why this animatronic is jumbled up this way, but it's definitely an interesting find. Now, just beneath the hallway, we'll find another copy of Freddy floating in the void, only this one isn't scrunched up like the other. This model is actually used when Freddy opens the main door before jump scaring you. If the player doesn't flash Freddy enough times throughout the night, you'll actually fail to complete the level, and a sequence plays out where Freddy cuts the power and jump scares you. Aside from this particular instance, Freddy is a mostly passive threat in this level, and can't kill you before 6 AM. As this cutscene continues, the clock above the double doors repeatedly resets, eventually being surrounded in children's drawings as the building begins to burn. This eerie sequence actually takes place within the same map, and a duplicate wall can be found hidden out of bounds. It's only the blue wall, a section of the ceiling, as well as the assets seen in the cutscene itself. We can also watch as this cutscene plays out, and the drawings just sort of appear, followed by the flames ignited in midair as the sequence ends. Now let's take a look at some of these other animatronics. As I said earlier, Foxy can appear in all 3 locations in the office. From an outside perspective, we can watch what happens when the camera is focused on him, where we'll see that he gets more and more agitated with time. Eventually he'll unload, vanishing from the map completely. As for Chica, she can't attack from anywhere but the wall next to the center doors, and how she attacks is a bit different as well. She'll climb through the wall, forcing her way into the office to jump scare us. If we move the camera into the hallway during this time, we'll see that her legs are sticking out through the other side. As she makes it further into her office, her legs begin floating behind her as her feet clip through them. If we don't locate each of her cupcakes, she'll fall flat on her face in her office. She then stands back up and runs directly at us, resulting in a jump scare. Now taking a look at Bonnie, he can appear in all 3 of our cameras, and his main objective is to destroy them. When you look directly at him with the camera, his jump scare animation starts, and from another angle, we can see that he's rotated upwards to face the camera. He then punches forward at the non-existent camera, and the corresponding screen will be shut off until the night ends or the player dies. In a previous version of the game, Bonnie was able to jump scare and kill the player directly, but now he'll just stare at the camera until he's spotted or he eventually unloads. So before we move on, I wanted to see what would happen if I messed with the map a little bit. The majority of this level's gameplay involves running back and forth between the doors and the window. But what would happen if we delete these particular objects? Well, as you can see, by deleting the main doorway, we can walk out into the hallway and look around as much as we want. The door at the end of this hallway is pretty misleading though, since there's no doorway here, only a solid wall behind it. If an enemy loads in during this time, we'll be able to walk directly through them without dying. Because the player can't typically access these areas, there is no reason to add collision to these particular models, or any sort of jump scare triggers for that matter. Though we're still at risk of being jump scared from the main office, these particular models are completely harmless. Having the doors and curtains removed makes it a lot easier to see what's behind them, so we don't need to rely on sound cues to know which camera Foxy is hiding in. Unfortunately, there is a downside to this. By deleting these interactable objects, the trigger and logic for each entrance have been completely broken. So by opening the closet door, I'd be moved over to the hallway just to be moved back a moment later. At one point, this map was so broken that the player would open all the doors at once, meaning I got jump scared in the window when I opened the closet. So even though it made this night a lot easier, I couldn't use this strategy to beat it. Next, let's have a look at some of this game's cutscenes, starting with the prologue. Here we'll see Scott walking towards the house in the rain, receiving a phone call that confirms the house is now his. Zooming out during the sequence reveals that the house sits atop a large grassy canvas surrounded by dense trees. There's also a circle of grass that expands out of the player's typical point of view. More interesting, there are a handful of characters hidden on this map, some harder to spot than others. Ignited Bonnie is seen clipping through the very corner of the house, and you don't actually need hacks to see this. You can actually see him here in the very beginning of the intro sequence, though he's a bit hard to see due to how dark this cutscene is. Just around the corner, we'll find Freddy standing between a tree and the side of the house, and if we move through the wall, we'll see Foxy standing inside the house. Unfortunately, the housing market is rough these days, and the interior of the house has been scooped clean. The only part of the main cast not present in this map is Chica. Maybe she took off to buy some furniture for this place, and maybe the missing wall, if we're lucky. I believe these animatronics were left behind when this map was copied over from the free roam version of the game. Something I found pretty funny is that for the duration of this cutscene, our player model is nothing more than a pair of floating arms carrying a cell phone. Perhaps not as buff as our character in Indigo Park, but hey, we'll have to make it work. The following cutscene takes place in the perspective of Michael Schmidt, who wakes up in the dark garage of the Cawthon family home. He's briefly interrogated by Scott and his wife Val, who decide to let the stranger stay with him for the night. So first and foremost, this map is only a very small section of garage, with not much more to it than that. Outside the window are a set of trees placed in front of a flat image of an orange sky, but there's not much going on here besides that. However, we can now take a closer look at Scott and his wife, who bear a striking resemblance to each other. For some reason, the developers took Scott's face and pasted it over Val's model, meaning she looks exactly like him. You can't typically see this due to the light shining in your face, but it seems Michael isn't the only doppelganger present. As the cutscene comes to a close, Val will disappear around the corner, and she just freezes in this odd pose as it happens. This is a hilarious Easter egg, though it's a bit more creepy when you realize she has no eyeballs. After completing the living room, we'll view a cutscene where Scott runs upstairs, only for a massive hallway to appear behind him as Freddy arrives to give chase. We run through the winding hallways with Freddy not far behind, and after losing him, we enter the office. Here we pick up a flashlight and read through a small paper giving us instructions on how to defeat the ignited animatronics. From another perspective, we can watch as Scott makes his way up the stairs, but he doesn't look quite right from this perspective. His head is pushed backwards into his shoulders, and his legs don't move when he walks. After turning around, what was previously a wall has magically turned into a large hallway. This is done by simply removing the false wall that's placed here while the camera is facing away. It turns out illusionary walls aren't exclusive to Elden Ring after all. Behind the door beside us, Freddy is already loaded in, just staring at the floor. Until the door is opened, he remains in this pose, eventually looking up at the player. While watching this play out, I noticed a couple of things take place out of bounds. First, there are these two default textured objects placed just beyond the hallway where Freddy is located, one being a cube and the other a rectangular prism. Something else I found a bit strange is the paper and flashlight from the office are tied to Scott's model, and throughout this cutscene, they'll swing around this map haphazardly. As Freddy gives chase, this cutscene becomes downright hilarious. Scott is running through the halls, swinging his arms in front of him without ever moving his legs, while Freddy follows closely behind, gliding across the floor like the world's worst Roomba. They run around this maze of halls, sliding through these odd clouds of green smoke. As we near the office, Scott's head rotates around completely, his arms still swinging in front of him. As we grab the paper up ahead, you'll see that the rest of the office behind us is incomplete. And if we head all the way back to the start of the chase, we'll find Freddy in his original hallway. However, he's in his running pose and clipping through the wall now. Also, in case you're curious, the stairs at the start of this scene don't actually lead anywhere, and the first floor was a total lie. Zooming out, we can view this whole map in a single shot, seeing the various hallways we sprint through, as well as the black barriers that obscure our view through the windows. Next, we head into the basement, where a cutscene shows Scott walking down the stairs, only to be startled by the screen behind him turning on. After yelling at the monitor for a while, an unseen attacker knocks Scott unconscious from behind. From another perspective, this cutscene is, of course, just as ridiculous as you'd expect. Floating down the stairs, Scott is jump scared by the computer, resulting in this hilarious pose. For the duration of this sequence, he stares up directly at the ceiling, and I believe this is done so that his head does not clip through the camera and become visible during the cutscene. When Scott is attacked, we'll see that he dramatically throws himself off the chair and sinks into the floor, with no attacker anywhere in sight. This leads us into the following level's intro cutscene, where Scott finds himself strapped to a chair behind a desk. The voice of Michael comes through the radio, basically informing Scott that he's as good as dead. On the computer screen, we can see the furnace burning brightly, and eventually Creation appears and begins approaching the camera. Scott slams the radio down as the cutscene ends, and the night begins. So it turns out this area is occupied by more than just the attic, as the furnace is also present just behind the small wall outside the window. Just beneath this small basement room, Creation can be found frozen in place out of bounds. The computer monitor observing the furnace isn't a pre-rendered video, but instead a live view of the small room behind us. When Creation appears on the screen, we can see that this hidden model was moved in front of the furnace, which I thought was pretty neat. As for Scott, he doesn't do a whole lot during this cutscene, besides that freaky thing with his head. Similar to the flashlight and paper in the Freddy chase, the radio we pick up is actually floating around us as this sequence takes place, and the object on our desk will be moved deep into the void the moment we grab it. In the ending cutscene, we watch as Scott crawls through the burning attic, while Michael trash talks us through the radio some more. After telling Scott that the night won't end until he's consumed by the fire, we're picked up by the burnt silhouette of who I believe is Michael as the screen goes black, accompanied by Scott's blood-curdling scream. We then see a few panning shots of the house as it burns from the inside, leading us to the end of the game. With the lights on, we can see that the board beside us falls on our head as soon as we escape our restraint. Scott then begins to crawl across the floor like one of the zombies from Half-Life, with his legs sticking directly through the floor. Beneath the map, we can actually see the figure that appears in front of us just beneath the attic's entrance. They're definitely doing a good job of imitating Scott though, since their legs are bent up behind them with their feet curling over their shoulders. This was not what I expected, but I can't say I'm surprised either. Scott, once again staring into the ceiling, crawls forward as he tries to escape the attic. Michael is then warped directly in front of us, only here we can see that he's just kind of hovering his hands over our head. Now I unfortunately couldn't move the camera around in this next scene, so instead I want to show off something interesting. Now throughout the game, there are a few narrations that play over panning shots of the levels we play through. These areas aren't all that interesting, as they're mostly smaller versions of the full levels, but here you can see one that's a bit different. This is the map used for the narration that plays before entering the basement, and you can see it's a long wall with windows that get more eroded the further you go in. There's a wall behind us as well, and at the very end we can see Golden Freddy sitting in midair, staring through the window. It's a super basic map, but the effect it creates is actually pretty cool looking. Now when looking through the game files, I found a map titled Newspapers. This is a mostly empty map containing each of the newspapers and their surroundings seen in the post-level shots that display them. They're all lined up separately here, and the cameras move between them depending on where you are in the story. So now that we have the cutscenes out of the way, let's resume our trek through the levels. Up next is the basement. Now the basement is the fourth level of the game, and within the basement, you must navigate between multiple levels of different challenges. Some of them make you burn animatronic props, while others you must run for your life. So the way this works behind the scenes is that each area you go to is actually stored above the others. All the areas are kind of floating around in the void, and your character warps between them when they go through specific doors or they enter the bathroom. The bathroom is always on level 6, the very first area you start in and at the bottom of all of this. You'll notice that when you enter and exit the bathroom on different levels throughout this quest, that you'll get a flicker of light that happens when you touch the bathroom door. And this is because as soon as the player touches that door, they are instantly teleported to the bathroom on level 6. The reason this flash occurs is because the lighting for each area is different. So during the instantaneous moment when the player moves, the lighting around you of course changes. So there's not really a whole lot to section 6, which is this bottom level, so we're gonna go up to section 5 now. Now section 5 is the area where you must retrieve 4 animatronic props. You must collect the cupcake, the guitar, the top hat, and the hook. And as you progress, there's an endo or a fallen that spawns near the furnace that you're burning these items in. But what's interesting about this whole area is that there is actually another fallen outside of bounds. This animatronic is just floating off in the void, just outside this room. It's kind of creepy just seeing them here hovering in the fog. But this isn't the only thing out of bounds. In fact, there's another room that we can't access unless we die. So normally when you die in Section 4, because the player is burning these items, the death cutscene has the player getting burned inside the furnace themselves. And the way the developers pull this off is they actually have a separate room that the player warps to upon their death. In this room, there are 4 of the Fallen that are just watching the player burn alive in the furnace. But this entire scene is inside of a box just outside the main area. This is done so that when the death occurs, the player can just instantaneously warp over here and the cutscene will play out. But there's a lot more to see, so we're going to move on to Section 4. Now in Section 4, there are 2 keypads that you must enter these codes on. And while you're entering these codes, there is a endo that is hunting you down in the dark. And this animatronic only moves when you're not looking at it. But because of how dark it is normally in this game, you can never see this animatronic actually move. However, as you can tell by the footage, I brightened up this area and we can actually see the animatronic move in real time. So by detaching the camera from the player and aligning it into the dark, and then triggering the move cycle for this animatronic, you can see that they just sort of slide around. It's actually kind of comical, I'm not gonna lie. Now I have the game speed turned down a bit right here because they normally move faster than this, but yeah, they just sort of slide around and they turn very, very sharply. What's also interesting about this area is that beneath the floor, that you normally can't see, there are 2 animatronics stored down there that don't have any legs. I'm not entirely sure why they're here or why they don't have legs, but they are, and they're just kind of chilling down here in the void. Now, probably one of the most terrifying sections of the basement is the chase scene that takes place after Section 4. So you enter this very, very dark hallway, and you must keep moving forward to reach this door at the end. However, there is a Fallen behind you that is closing in on your position. And man, does our character move super, super slow. I was honestly messing with things and speeding my character up because this takes forever to get down this hallway. But during that, of course, I was messing with things too. So first off, if you go down this hallway backwards, so basically you turn around and you face the door you came in, and you keep walking backwards the entire duration of the tunnel, you will instantly die when the sound effects of the endoskeleton start playing. Now, I think this is because looking at it in this instance causes immediate death. But of course, I want to see what's going on behind me. So I alter the speed of the animatronic to be 1% of its normal speed. This will allow me to take the camera and move it into the hallway so we can see it moving after us. And it's kind of interesting to see. So it's like not actually animated, it just has these hard poses that it strikes as it moves along. It's very jarring, it's very sharp, and there's like no in-betweens for its movement. But at the same time, that's also what makes it super terrifying. It's definitely very, very creepy. Now, after we complete this chase section, there is another room right after this that has multiple animatronics that pursue you in the dark. So of course, at this point, I know how they move, and because the room is brightened, I can also see how they move. Just like the ones down below, they are sliding towards me, ultimately trying to jump scare me. But I wanted to put their pathfinding to the test. So I wanted to see what would happen if they could not find or touch the player. And my method for doing so was to shrink the size of the player and make them hide beneath the desk. So beneath the desk, the collision for the desk is preventing the animatronics from reaching me. So they actually just stop moving. They do not know what to do, and they cannot figure out how to reach the player. I thought this was pretty interesting. But as I was moving through this room as the size of a mouse, I accidentally fell through the floor. And I fell all the way down to the furnace cutscene room that I was talking about earlier. Apparently, the floor extends past the wall, and I was stuck on this little sliver of land in the void. In the room beside me was those 4 animatronics just staring at the furnace, but I couldn't get to them. So I basically just jumped off, and I had to manually restart this area. Going back through it, this time I completed it normally, and once we reached the top of the stairs, at the end of this entire room is wiped clean. It is still the same room it was, but they delete all the assets from it the second we touch that door at the top. And when we come back through, we're now going to enter the final area. So a lot of players may have noticed this, but when you exit the bathroom in this final area, the bathroom door behind you is gone. You basically step out of a wall, and there is no door from where you just came from. And this is kind of funny because the door is actually still there. It's just you can't see it. And I'm not sure how many people tried this, but if you were to walk up to the wall that you came out of and hit the trigger for the door, you will walk into the wall and warp all the way down to Section 6 and that bathroom. Except this time, the bathroom door behind you will be gone. You can actually just look straight up to Section 6 even though the collision for the door is still there. Now, the player's ability to still open the door is a mistake. At least I think it is. But the reason why the door is transparent and now lacks a model is because they wanted it to disappear when you go up above. So the door is invisible, but it still functions as a door, so we can take it from section 6 back up top to the final room. I was worried I was going to get stuck, but luckily that is not the case. And now we've reached the end of the basement, and this triggers the cutscene with the computer. Now what's kind of funny is the computer cutscene, and also the cutscene for the newspaper laying in the lawn, they're both on the same map. So just by looking off to the right, we can see the newspaper and the grass sort of bleeding into this computer office setting. It's a bit funny, but I totally get why they did it this way. And now with the basement complete, we just have one final area left to tackle in the story mode version of the game. The final memory in the Joy of Creation is the attic. And honestly, this is probably the most difficult challenge in the game. But how does this entire area work behind the scenes? How did the developer pull off this terrifying final challenge? Why don't we take a look, shall we? So as a quick refresher, in the attic, there is a television in front of you, and you need to watch the different rooms around the entire house. Like a traditional Five Nights at Freddy's challenge, you must shut the doors behind you so that animatronics do not come in and kill you. Now the goal for this is a bit different because you're not trying to run out the clock like a traditional challenge in Five Nights at Freddy's. Lasting a long time to 6 AM does not bring you freedom. It only brings you death because Creation, this amalgamation of the ignited animatronics, is hunting you down. And so the longer you last, the closer Creation gets through the entire house. So Creation starts off in the basement, and to the right of your monitor is a lever that you pull that flashes the camera. And when you do this, Creation gets stunned. It will prevent them from moving forward, and it will reset their phase in the room. Normally, Creation has to break through a couple different objects in the room to get to the next room, but by flashing them, you can delay this process. But you have a choice to make, because you can only flash the camera every so often, and it takes time to reset. Now, the true goal is not to delay Creation. No, that's sort of a looming threat. The true goal is to flash Golden Freddy 12 times, and with each flash, a fire begins to spread throughout the house. And you can use this to sort of gauge your progress to see how close you are to being done. Of course, alongside this, you need to watch your screen to make sure that the endos in the other attic rooms do not come in. You use the lever to the left of the monitor to view this second set of cameras. You must then shut the doors behind you so that they don't come in, and you need to pull the levers on each side to shut the corresponding door to prevent that endo from coming in. You also need to listen very carefully on which side the running endo could pop in on. Of course, you need to close that door so they bonk their head and then wander back to where they came from. And the last threat, besides Creation reaching the final room, is Golden Freddy, who can appear behind you as a giant head. You basically need to quickly look away, otherwise you will die. And all of that together is the 5th Memories Challenge. So, now that you have a refresher on the flow of events in this challenge, let's show you what's going on behind the scenes, because there's a lot. So everything that you can see through the cameras exists on this map. If we were to exit the attic, you'll see all these different rooms scattered throughout this map. From the basement, to the living room, to the office, to the baby's room, and even the 2 sub-attic rooms that you can't normally see by turning around. The cutscene with the phone is even on this map too. If you go out of bounds, you'll see the phone sitting in this giant blank floor space, and if we zoom in, we can see the phone and the correct angle that we normally see during the cutscene. But let's talk about some of the basics. So the screen in front of you actually has 2 separate screens it can show. It has all the rooms in the house and has the attic rooms that have the endos. Now what you can't see is that when you swap this camera, the screen you are looking at appears way below you underground. And it's interesting because this screen is normally invisible to the main in-game camera. Even if we were to move the camera down there and look at it, we won't see anything. It's actually hidden, so we have to enable some things in order to see it. But as you can see, either screen can appear down here, way below the map. Going back up top, there's a window behind us in the attic that we can normally face when we turn around. And as you'll see, if we move the camera there isn't really a world beyond that window. It's literally just a rainy background. It's a small gap that has some trees, there's some rain and some wind, and there's actually a wall right there, and that wall is the basement just beyond the attic. Normally you can't see this, but it is right there. Now, right outside the walls of the attic space that we are occupying as the player is a lot of things. So beneath the floor of the attic, we can find the Creation laying down in a T-pose, just chilling beneath the trapdoor. So on this map, there are actually 2 Creations. There's the one that's sort of wandering through the house, and then there's this one that only appears when Creation makes it into the attic space. Until then, this monster is just waiting down here, asserting its dominance until it is called upon into the attic. Now the actual Creation can be spotted in the different rooms, always frozen in place. But Golden Freddy actually behaves a bit differently. So Golden Freddy can appear in the rooms, and that's when you flash to them with a camera, but when they aren't on the map, they actually appear in random locations outside the map. And honestly, I'm not entirely sure what these different locations mean. I just assumed there would be one spot that Golden Freddy would go to when not in use, but there are actually multiple, and I don't know why. Now we'll come back to Golden Freddy here in a sec, but I want to talk about those endos now. So what's interesting is by the model of that T-posing creation, actually in front of it, the endo that's going to attack you will load in ahead of time. Now, if you can see below the floor, you can see what endoskeleton was going to attack you, very similar to if you were to look at the cameras and you can see the static, you know you're about to get attacked by the endoskeleton. So at this point, you would normally shut the door to prevent them from attacking you, but it's kind of weird to think that they're just waiting beneath the floorboards, just waiting to attack you. And that's exactly what they do. When the jump scare actually happens, the endoskeleton literally morphs through the floor to their jump scare position. And as soon as they get there, the jump scare then plays. Now normally, this would cause the player to turn around and get hit by the jump scare, but watching this uninterrupted is kind of surreal. It looks really funny. Oh, the secrets of game dev. Now, of course, in the adjacent attic rooms where the endos load and unload, they do just that. We have these two corners that represent the attic, and these endos just spawn in there when they're present and they disappear when they are not. But what's kind of interesting is that the running endo, the one that can run into the room like Foxy from Five Nights at Freddy's 1, that endo is constantly running just behind the right door. So if we're to turn around and look to the left, just outside that door is this endo running a marathon in place. They are severely hauling some major butt. And when you die to the running endo, basically they get warped to the door that they come out of and the jump scare plays. But we are not done with out of bounds objects yet, because Golden Freddy can kinda get weird. So something that can happen during this challenge is that Golden Freddy can appear behind you. And when that happens, Golden Freddy is this giant, massive head. There is no body that you can see, it is just a floating head. However, beneath the floor, we can find Golden Freddy's body. And what's interesting is that the body is still technically attached to this head, yet the head is 2 or 3 times the size of the head normally, maybe even more. But beneath this floor, the giant head is dragging around the body of Golden Freddy that's just out of sight. And Golden Freddy's body can actually clip through the creation's body. They sort of just pile up down there. And all these characters together, appearing and disappearing and warping around the map, is what makes this challenge as creepy as it is. And for one final thing, as we get closer and closer to the end of the challenge, obviously fire starts to consume the building. Now what's really interesting is that if we slow the game down and take a look at the fire, we can kind of see how this fire is created. It starts off as a little flicker and then it evolves almost into a plume of sorts as the fire expands. And the way they do fire in this fan game is the same way they actually do the fire in Help Wanted, the official Five Nights at Freddy's game. For example, during the corn maze where Foxy chases you, the fire does this thing where it always rotates and faces the camera. And in the Joy of Creation, the fire that spawns that burns this building is exactly the same thing. It is designed to always face the camera, and if we move the camera, then the fire moves with it. And with that final note, that wraps up the attic in the Joy of Creation. But very quickly before jumping into the Joy of Creation Reborn, we're going to look at the title screen and extras menu. So the title screen is this square room with all these doors in front of us. And the way this map works is that as soon as you open a door, all these animated layers appear behind them to create the flickering static effect you normally see. Not much else is here though, so let's take a look at the extras menu. So the extras menu doesn't contain a lot, but we can see that alongside the model viewer for the animatronics, we'll have the 2 newspaper objects stored off screen. And when we switch to a different animatronic, there is a UI element that obscures our vision while the next animatronic immediately loads in. But now we have completed the Joy of Creation story mode in its entirety, and it is time to jump into the earlier version of the game with the Joy of Creation Reborn. Reborn was the earlier version of the Joy of Creation prior to the finalized story mode. In this beta version of the game, you have the ability to free roam and avoid animatronics. But what does the game hide from the player from the developer's point of view? In all of the maps outside of the bonus map, our player is running away from animatronics and collecting items. The gameplay in Reborn typically revolves around mazes in the inside of a house, with Chica's area being an exception. And so the gameplay is relatively similar, outside of some new mechanics for certain characters. However, before we dive into the individual places, let's start off on the title screen to begin our adventure. So the first thing we see in the game is the title screen. And in the title screen, we have a door in front of us similar to story mode, except the difference is when this door opens, we see an animatronic behind it. And depending which character name we click on, that character will appear inside the door. So if we were to back up the camera, you'll see that this area is bisected by a wall. You have this front room that we can see on the normal title screen, and then you have this back area that's outside that you can only see through the doorway. But this is what it looks like if you move the camera around. Now, you might be curious how the animatronics actually swap out, and it's actually instantaneous. As soon as the door closes, the old animatronic disappears, and the new one fills the spot. But that's all the title screen has to offer, so now we're going into Freddy's challenge. Now, every challenge in this game typically has an intro sort of title screen that shows a character and their name in front of them. And this is typically from a fixed perspective. However, it's actually a 3D scene. So we can fly the camera around Freddy and see the scene from a different perspective before ultimately beginning the challenge. Now, the challenge with Freddy has quite a lot to look at. I was actually very surprised. So normally, you spawn inside the house and you're running from Freddy, who's chasing you, and the only parts of the environment you can see outside the house are through the windows. And that is a very limited world view. There's so much more out there, and I am very excited to show you. Now, these windows do show sort of Easter eggs sometimes. Sometimes you'll see an animatronic out there like Bonnie that you can view from the window inside, letting you know that outside is not safe. And in some ways, this is a nod back to the alpha version of this game, because when you started that game, directly behind you, behind the door, was 3 animatronics staring at you from outside. Now, that was only a tech demo that had Freddy wandering around the halls, but it's neat to see that they evolved the concept a bit and put these animatronics around the actual environment. But enough talking about being inside the house, let's go outside. So the exterior of the house is kind of interesting. We can run around the entirety of the house through the forest, and on different sides you'll find different things. In some places, the wooden floor from inside the house just sort of extends beyond its walls and out into the forest. It's kind of weird. I'm not entirely sure why this was left here, but it is. But besides that, we can see Bonnie, who is normally by the tree that we can see through the window, and we can also see 2 Foxy animatronics. Now, this is really interesting, because one of these animatronics is standing by a tree, which is designed so the player can see it from inside the house. But there is another Foxy out here that is behind a wall that the player cannot normally see. And this Foxy looks kind of aggressive. Foxy looks like it's attacking. And having the second Foxy out here makes me wonder if Foxy used to also be on this map. Now, my hunch for that is because there's also another Freddy out here too. And this Freddy is called upon when a jump scare occurs. So when the player runs into Freddy inside, they are warped outside for the jump scare. And it starts playing right here. As I'll get into later, all the maps have a similar mechanic where the jump scare animatronic, a separate version from the main animatronic, is stored out of bounds. So by this logic, it makes me wonder if Foxy used to be a threat on this map. So as we get farther and farther away from the house, you'll see that the forest kind of ends, and we actually come to the edge of this floating island. However, the map goes on quite a bit beyond this. And at one point, there's actually a path that the player can walk on that leads away from the house and sort of just comes to a dead end. Now, the player controller, at least that's what we call it in Unity. I'm not an Unreal Engine guy, but from what I can tell, there's a really interesting physic applied to this controller. It has extreme friction, and no matter what, it will try to keep the player on the ground. As you can see, I'm trying to fall off these edges, but my character is sticking to them. I'm like a magnet, and the ground is metal. But we can see that there is a land beneath us that we want to get to. So I'm going to break this logic for a second and fall down below, and this puts us beneath the house. Now, this grassy floor down here goes on for quite a bit, and then it becomes some really big hills. So I started to wander around this grassy world, and I realized the physics applied to the character are really extreme. I can't even walk up these hills. The player cannot walk up any slope at all, and is limited to only walking on flat ground. This is a bit odd, but I started flying around the hills because I was curious if there was something out here. And there's not really anything, but the hills get really, really weird, like almost cartoonish, with how tall and wavy they get. Trying to land on these hills at all will make the player slide down them. Like, you can't fight the momentum. You just start sliding as if you're on ice, and you cannot stop it. And it's bizarre because if there's a flat surface on the hill at any point, well, the character sort of just gets stuck. They can't move at all, and they're stuck there. Going back to the big grassy field beneath the house though, we can walk under the house and look up and see Freddy walking around. It's very odd looking at Freddy from this perspective. We can see the entirety of the maze down here, but there's nothing else down here. It's just all grass. moving back to the side of the house by the windows, we can actually look at Freddy from outside, and he's very aggressively trying to get us. However, we are safe outside, and we can watch him run around like a madman. I honestly think he's getting a bit stir-crazy. So we're gonna hop on top of the house, and on top of the house, we can walk around. There is an invisible ceiling that we can step on, and we can explore the maze from up here. And what's interesting is that in all the areas where we cannot walk, there are actually sealed rooms that we normally cannot get into. So, if we were to hop down into one of these sealed rooms, we can see that Freddy cannot get us. We are perfectly safe inside these small rooms. And even if for some reason we want Freddy to try to kill us, well, he can't. The walls are just thick enough that even if Freddy clips through the wall and tries to get us, well, we won't get jump scared. And there's a lot of different areas like this in this house. If we take the camera up above and fly it around, you can see all the different little pocket rooms that we cannot access normally in gameplay. Going back inside, I spawned some more Freddys into the maze. Now these Freddys do not move, and they're actually a little bit smaller than the regular Freddy that is on this map. Now these Freddys stand still because I did not load a behavior onto them when I brought them to the map. However, even though they're smaller, they can still stop the regular Freddy by making him get hung up on them. So it's kind of funny running from Freddy, but having little Freddys help you by stopping him in his tracks. But eventually Freddy's gonna get us. But before he does, we are gonna see what his jump scare looks like in slow motion. So as he hits us, we get warped outside, and we can see the jump scare playing back in bullet time. And as we slowly die, this very drawn out death, this brings the Freddy challenge to a close, and it's time to move on. Next up, we're heading to the basement with Bonnie. Now the basement starts off with an intro shot, just like Freddy's, where we have Bonnie behind a title. And if we move the camera around, this is what that looks like from a different perspective. There is nothing else on this map, this is the only thing, so we're going to move on to the actual challenge now. So the basement challenge is an underground labyrinth where Bonnie is chasing you through the dark. And honestly, putting some distance between you and Bonnie feels a bit harder than trying to outrun Freddy from the previous challenge. That's just my opinion. I don't know if that's accurate, but I felt like I had a harder time getting away from Bonnie than I did Freddy. Now, this map is a bit barren because there is no exterior outside this map. There's no reason because there is no outside world to see through the windows. So first things first, I wanted to get away from Bonnie, so we actually hop on top of the maze and we can walk on top of the ceiling, similar to how we can walk on top of the house. Seeing the basement from this perspective and making it a bit brighter helps. I also feel a lot more safe up here because Bonnie will not kill me, but being up here allows me to see some things that we normally could not see. And all of this pertains to the actual edges of the maze. So if we were to go to the edge of the map, it just becomes this open space that goes on forever. However, around the edge of the map, in certain areas, is a path. And I find this interesting. So the floor actually creeps out past the walls quite a bit, and I've seen this in other levels too, especially like the basement in the Joy of Creation story mode. But because this flooring extends past the wall, it allows us to walk down here around the edges of this area and not have to worry about Bonnie. Bonnie cannot get to us, but we can sort of follow this secret tunnel on the outside of the map around the perimeter in certain parts. Now, it does abruptly end in certain areas, and we cannot actually fall off it due to the physics thing I mentioned before, but it's out here that we find something else that's quite interesting. And that is the duplicate model of Bonnie that's out here that is used for the jump scare. Similar to Freddy on the first map, if we get hit by Bonnie at any point, we will get warped all the way over here, and this Bonnie will trigger the jump scare and basically punch us in the face. It's actually a very painful jump scare, but if we slow it down, we can see how this animation looks in bullet time and provide a different perspective of the punch. And this is what that looks like right now. I don't think the punch will hurt us at that speed, but it is kind of neat to see the animation slow down so we can appreciate everything that goes into it when it's not sped up. So now that we've wrapped up the basement, let's head on over to the forest area where Chica gives us a run for our money. Now, just like the previous challenges, when you go into Chica's challenge, there is a title/splash screen that has Chica on it and their title, and this is what that looks like from different angles. Now, when it comes to this challenge, I honestly think this is one of the most difficult challenges in this version of the game. You're within a forest and you have to go around and collect all these different drawings or things pinned to trees and other objects, and it's very much Slender of the 8 pages, except the problem is, unlike other challenges, you don't have a maze of walls and stuff to separate you from your assailant. Chica is lurking in the dark and she will run at you, and the only thing you can do to defend yourself is to like quickly look at her. I think that's the mechanic. You have to like quickly turn around and look at her and then she'll stop moving for a second. But honestly, I'm not entirely too sure. I actually never beat this challenge. However, just because I did not clear it personally does not mean I don't have some cool things to show off. So the map itself is basically trees and rocks, and there's pathways and stuff through the forest, and the whole map is enclosed in a metal fence. Now the first thing I want to do is get the heck out of here. I do not want to be inside this metal fence with Chica, so we're going to get on the outside. And once we're on the outside of this metal fence, we're actually safe from Chica. Now Chica will run right up to the fence and try to kill us, but she cannot pass through the fence. She just sort of like aggressively slides against it, trying her best to get us. But luckily, we are safe and we have nothing to worry about. Now this area is kind of interesting because beyond the fence, in this outer world, we do have these trees, and the trees in this map sort of spawn in. They have a loading distance that they are affected by. So as we walk, the trees around us sort of spawn in and fade out. So surrounding this entire map, the forest eventually comes to an end, and we just have an open field. And this open field goes on for a bit, and it goes all around this level. Now, what is most interesting is what is hidden in the forest outside of the map, and that is the various animatronics that are not pursuing you in this map. So for example, we can find Freddy just chilling out here. And all these animatronics are placed specifically so that if you were up against the fence in the danger zone within the actual challenge itself, you would still be able to see these animatronics staring at you from the dark forest out of bounds. So they're kind of like Easter eggs. And we have Freddy, who's over here, and then on a different side of the fence, we have Bonnie, who's sort of looking from behind a tree, and then we also have Foxy. Now, all 3 of these are really creepy. When you see them when Chica is chasing after you, it definitely makes you even more scared. And the Bonnie that's by the tree, I have a theory about this Bonnie that also applies to the first area with Freddy, and how this Bonnie in this orientation is actually accidentally included within the story mode version of the game. And this has to do with the opening and closing cutscenes of that game. Because if you were to brighten up the map, you will see that Bonnie is clipping through the house. Now my hunch for this is that this map was duplicated so that the trees would spawn in like they do here. However, this time they placed a house onto the map so that they could create the intro cutscenes and the credits to the game. However, during this duplication process, Bonnie was also copied, yet they weren't removed. So Bonnie can be found clipping through the side of the house. And like I said, you normally cannot see this because of how dark the game is, but I think it's kind of cool. Now, going back to Reborn, if we head far out of bounds, we can find another Chica deep in the woods. And just like the previous encounters with animatronics out of bounds, this duplicate animatronic, in this case Chica, is used for the jump scare animation. So you get hit by Chica and you get warped out here and you get jump scared. Now Chica, when she jump scares you, starts to peck through your skull or your torso, and watching this in slow motion is actually kind of funny, so here you go. Now next up we have Foxy's map. And before we get into Foxy's map, we have Foxy's title screen, which shows Ignited Foxy, and this is what that looks like from a different angle. Now, Foxy's map in the attic is very similar to Bonnie's map in the basement. So normally, in order to beat this mode, you have to flash Foxy with your flashlight. And this will temporarily stun Foxy so you can get farther away and do the things you need to do. But we can't get out of bounds of this map, and we can walk on top of the entire attic area. And it's kind of creepy out here. It looks like this weird surreal maze, and we can wander around on top of the attic, exploring all the different nooks and crannies that are up here. And obviously, the biggest things we can see are the slanted roofs of the attic. These taller attic rooms can actually still be stood on. We can walk on them. However, the sides of these rooms are like a slope, so you'll begin to slide really, really fast, and this momentum can actually make us fall off the map, even though our player character Collider normally restricts this from happening. And it's near these taller rooms that we can actually see the jump scare Foxy out of bounds. And near this Foxy is a tree that is just sort of floating there. But Foxy's between these 2 attic rooms, perfectly positioned so the player will never see it. But honestly, there isn't really a whole lot to this map. Wandering around it and the interior is cool, but on the outside it's pretty barren. However, as always, the slow motion jump scare is really funny, so we can give that a watch. But with this, we wrapped up all the basic challenges in the game. However, now it is time to move on to the extra mode. Now, the extra mode is a reward for beating all the challenges in the game, and it sort of feels like a guided experience through like a haunted house. Upon loading in, you're in this room that has 4 of the ignited animatronics all within glass cases, and it really feels like a museum. There's some really nice music playing, and it actually feels kind of relaxing. You also feel safe because they're within these boxes, and the aesthetic of this room makes it feel like it is indeed like a model viewer and bonus content. However, when you go and flip the light switch off, things change, the room gets dark, and then a doorway appears. And this doorway takes you through a series of 3 separate hallways. And these hallways do have things in them to scare you. Like in the first one, there is a ghostly Freddy that sort of pops out at the end and spooks you. In the second hallway, you sort of get spooked by another animatronic that appears, and you have to turn around and then go through a different door. And then ultimately, this door takes you to the final area, which has a bunch of ghostly, glitchy Foxies. They're all scattered around, and they actually sort of make a hallway that you need to walk through. As you continue to walk, they get more narrow, and then eventually you get a jump scare with text on screen. And the text says, "Come back later." Now, that's the normal flow of events, but if we brighten up this map, you can see how this map is actually laid out. So you have these 3 giant sloped hallways that are all lined up on the map. In trying to walk on top of any of these will actually make your character enter a free slide, similar to the hills from Freddy's challenge, and we can't do anything, we just slide all the way to the end. However, of course, like most things, the developer is going to hide things out of bounds that they don't need anymore, or that they need to use inside the map. So first off, we can actually find the ghostly Freddy, who was teasing us in the first 2 tunnels. He is just out of bounds of the first tunnel to the left side. And actually, if we're out here, there's walkable ground. There's enough flooring that we can walk around and actually check out this creepy version of this Freddy. And yeah, he's just standing out here, not doing anything, and we can't interact with him. Moving on, the jump scare area is actually found between tunnels 2 and 3. So near the end of the 3rd tunnel to the left, between those 2 tunnels, you will find the ghostly Foxy and the jump scare text. And they're just floating out here. So the player is either transported out here, or the camera is moved out here so that jump scare can play and we can see this text. But unknown to the player, they were always just out here, right to our left. But while we're here, we might as well look at the brightened models of the Foxy animatronics, and this is what they look like. But with this wraps up our adventure in the Joy of Creation Reborn. And thus concludes our coverage of both this version and story mode. I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into these games, and if my behind the scenes videos help you with your own game dev dreams, I'd love to know. As always, I'll see you all soon in the next one. Cheers!